Hi there, homeschoolers of Texas. This is an update about the vote on school choice that happened this week. So come on in, we're going to give you a breakdown, what happened, and what we're going to do about it going forward. I'm Emily Fort, Executive Director of the Homeschool Freedom Coalition. And as basically every homeschooler in the state of Texas knows, this week, the other night, 2 in the morning, the Texas House voted to pass SB 2. Which of the school choice bills that were filed in Austin this year, this was the worst one because the House version, HB 3, didn't have mandatory testing for homeschoolers. This one does. So here we sit. This bill has passed, and we have heard from hundreds and hundreds of homeschoolers in Texas how frustrated they are and disappointed. We, too, feel the same emotions. This is not what homeschoolers wanted. Homeschoolers were not fighting for this bill. When I was in the Capitol talking with legislators and specifically with their aides, who of course the aides are the ones who handle most of the communication that a legislator receives, the vast majority told me that they had not heard from very many pro-homeschooling pro SB2 homeschoolers. They had heard from a lot of anti-SB2 homeschoolers. In fact, I think the ratio one aide gave me was like 7-1 against. Okay, so we know, having spoken to thousands of homeschoolers and gotten tens of thousands of homeschoolers to coalesce against SB2, this wasn't an organic bill that grew out of homeschoolers' desire for choice. Because, of course, Texas homeschoolers already had the choice to homeschool or private school or, Montessori school, co-op, whatever you want to do. Those are already choices Texans had. So this poorly worded version of school choice was not an organic request coming from homeschoolers just beating on the doors of their legislators saying, give us school choice. This was a different type of fight. And so we understand, and just to clarify, we understand and fully support a desire to get more kids out of the failing and failed government school system, that they're not fit places for children anymore. We have a lot of sympathy for parents who are still stuck in that system. We just don't believe the government having control of homeschooling is really much of a solution. So, but how did we get here? That's the most important thing. What can we learn from this? So we've had, a setback. We've opened the door to regulations in Texas like we've never had before in our state. So what can we learn from this, and what are we going to do differently going forward? So I just want to make sure every homeschooler in Texas understands how we got here. And the way that we got here was because the Texas Homeschool Coalition sold us out all the way along the line for years in a row now. They are not representing what homeschoolers in Texas want, and most importantly, they are not upholding the duty that homeschoolers have paid them to perform, which is defending homeschooling from government regulation and overreach. Well, for the first time, actually technically the Tebow bill was the first time, but now the second and most egregious time, the Texas Homeschool Coalition has not only allowed legislation that dramatically impacts regulation and opens the door to future regulation, but they've celebrated it. So this morning or yesterday afternoon, maybe they sent, I forget, because I was up till 2:30 in the morning watching the vote, of course. They celebrated the passage of this bill as a great victory for homeschoolers. Of course, it is anything but, because this is the first time in Texas history that there is a subset of homeschoolers at all that must submit to curriculum restrictions and must submit to testing. Now, yes, it's currently optional to opt into the system, but I'll break this down probably in another video, but that's never happened. The only anything close to that's ever happened in Texas history would be the Tebow bill, which again, thousands of homeschoolers in Texas did not want. And again, the Texas Homeschool Coalition celebrated as a big victory. So what's going on here, right? What's happening is the Texas Homeschool Coalition, from our perspective, seems to have made some backdoor deals where they would rather have a seat at the table or respectability or I have no idea who's donating to them anymore. I don't know a single homeschooler I know that will ever give them a dime ever again because they're not doing their stated purpose. And at this point, even if they scrambled and saw their donations plummet through the floor, which they should absolutely plummet through the floor, and we're very hopeful that will happen because we don't need fake leadership. We don't need fake protection. The organization has been paid to perform a duty and has utterly, utterly failed in that duty. And again, I said this in other videos, it's one thing to not be up to the task. It's another to support the legislation that regulates homeschooling for the first time in Texas history. I believe that their actions were either, again, malevolent, and they know what they're doing and they're willing to sell out homeschooling as long as it gets them a seat at a nicer table or a bigger seat at the table. I'm not really sure. Or, they're totally incompetent. Neither of those are things we want here in homeschooling. But ultimately, even if they pivoted immediately and were like, oh no, all of our donations are falling off. Nobody trusts us. We're losing our reputation. We have to immediately do an about face and start attacking, people that would regulate homeschooling. They've lost their credibility. They've lost their standing. They've lost their claim to speak for homeschoolers here in Texas. It's a sad day for them, but it's a good day for homeschoolers in Texas because now we have a chance of actually getting an organization in Texas that will actually fight. And here's the ultimate thing. This bill was the result of millions and millions of dollars in campaign spending over several years. And THSC should have been actively fighting this at every step of the way for years, right? So what happened this week, on Wednesday or, into Tuesday morning or Thursday morning is not really a shock to anyone who's been following what's going on because we're literally seeing tens of millions of dollars spent to get this bill passed, this really poorly worded bill. So if it costs tens of millions of dollars and the Texas Homeschool Coalition wasn't fighting anywhere along the process, this was somewhat inevitable. But now we can finally move into an era where homeschoolers start to stand up, and the fight for homeschooling now moves away from these big established organizations that want to play ball with the establishment, and we can move to real, authentic grassroots advocacy at the state level. And so there are some options here. Obviously, here at the Homeschool Freedom Coalition, we exist to fight hard at election time, at primary time, and during the legislative session to advance your homeschooling rights. We've partnered up with some great organizations here in Texas, the Texans for Homeschool Freedom, personal friends of mine for over a decade, strongly support them, strongly support what they're doing. We hope that you'll get behind our organization and theirs and help us push the fight for homeschooling back to the grassroots where actual homeschoolers' voices can be heard, instead of THSC pretending to speak for homeschooling while they sit at their fancy dinners and take $1.5 million from homeschoolers here in Texas to basically do nothing for us. So that era is ended. That's a great thing. And the rise of new organizations who will fight is also a good thing. One other positive of all of this is that homeschoolers have made such a loud fuss. Homeschoolers have been loud. They've gotten in people's faces, metaphorically speaking. They have sent thousands and thousands of emails into the legislature. We know that from just seeing the software. Our software sent thousands and thousands of emails into the legislature. And then on top of that, we know there were other people mobilizing phone calls, texting. The grassroots homeschoolers really rose to the occasion here and made it clear to legislators that we're not in lockstep with what THSC is telling you, which is a good thing, right? Because we made such a fuss that I'd be really surprised if they rolled out tons of brand new regulations for homeschooling, in the very next session. I don't think they're stupid enough to do that. I mean, there may be, but I'd be surprised, okay? So that gives us time to build an effective grassroots operation here in Texas that will stand up. And the next time they do come with regulations, we'll be ready. We'll have an effective political force that can actually impact the path of a bill, not just get a rubber stamp from THSC. So what that means is, and again, I think most homeschoolers realize this, but I'll say it again, we're not terribly worried about what Greg Abbott wants to do to homeschoolers. We're worried he's not obviously protecting us, but we're more worried about the drift in Texas away from our conservative values. And we've seen some of the last major races here in Texas, the Senate race between O'Rourke and Ted Cruz and things like that. And we've seen the drift in our urban areas. We're not at all convinced that this is going to be a deep red state forever. And so we're worried about the regulations that will come in the future. If Texas continues its drift and little, district after district starts to become eaten up by the urban sprawl and turn into a blue district. And all of a sudden, the fights over regulating homeschooling become a lot more serious than you could opt in or opt out to avoid the regulations. Fundamentally, that's what THSC has not seen here. Their vision is so short-sighted that they don't see that 10 years from now, 12 years from now, 15, 16, 20 years from now, things could look very different in Texas, and a completely different type of leadership might be trying to regulate homeschooling, and THSC opened the door to them. And so that's a problem. Obviously we've addressed some of the good things that have come out of this, but we're not fundamentally worried about today or tomorrow or next month. We're worried about our kids' right to homeschool if Texas's political climate changes. And of course, we have some evidence that would make us fear those things. But I talked quite a while about Texas here, but I want to make it clear, obviously, we're a national organization. We are headquartered in Texas, so this was a fight, we had to get pretty heavily invested in and are happy to have done. But this is going to become a national issue for every state that has passed these poorly worded. Now, some of the school choice bills out there are great. We can get behind some types of them. Again, we don't oppose school choice. We love getting kids out of government school. But some of the poorly worded ones open the door to regulations that have never, ever been conceived of in the history of homeschooling before. And so the problem that Texas is facing is going to be a problem in multiple states across the country in the coming years. And fundamentally, a lot of these states are not prepared. The organizations on the ground in those states are not prepared for legislative fights or to fight in primaries or to fight at election time. They are a lot of the state-based organizations. Now, in Texas's case, our organization turned on us, right? But in other states, these organizations have fought these bad bills tooth and nail, but we're unable to fight the infrastructure. And I think part of it is we need a new era of organization. A lot of the existing homeschool groups, God bless them. I know many of these people personally. They're wonderful people, but their organizations were founded in an era where we had to educate people how to homeschool and kind of come alongside, hold their hands. It's going to be okay. Your kids are going to turn out all right. The fundamental created purpose of a lot of the state-based organizations was not to fight legislative politics and was not to get involved heavily in primaries and elections with digital ads and texting and all the technological stuff and to weigh in heavy on these things. That's not what these organizations were founded to do. A lot of the leadership has a heart for that type of work, helping people start, helping come alongside people. The experience they have is in that role. And obviously they've fought some fights. There's no, I don't want to minimize what has been accomplished by a lot of these groups, but it's unmistakable that with the rise of school choice bills all over the country, some of these poorly worded ones in particular, and the decline and fall, praise God, of the Department of Education, there's going to be legislation like, to regulate homeschooling and to regulate, non-government education like we have never seen in our lifetimes. And so that's why our organization exists, is we are here to become the most aggressive and the most up-to-date political, legislative fighting force in the world of homeschooling. We're here to stop the gap, fill the gap where those state-based organizations, like in Texas, have completely turned on homeschooling, or in other states, they have simply not flex their muscles to become legislative powerhouses. We're here to help them. That's why we exist. We're here to help homeschooling in this era that's coming of increased regulations due to the decline of the Department of Education and the passage of some poorly worded school choice bills. So if this is what you're here for, if you've enjoyed this content, give us a like and a follow. Stay free, stay informed, stay the course. Thanks so much.